Recognized, Uncle Walker, D01. Recognized, Emily of Arden, D12. Initiate comic commentary.
Hello, team. Welcome to Comic Commentary. Tie-in issues 5 and 6. In this series, we will be reviewing the Young Justice tie-in comics that folded directly into the story arcs of the animated series. My name's Rich, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Emily.
Hi, everybody. In Comics Commentary, we will be discussing how the tie-in comics relate to the video game, the first 2 seasons of Young Justice, and the broader DC universe in general. Unlike our regular review episodes, though, we won't be having a Crashing the Mode segment, so consider this your spoiler warning.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us on Twitter at the YJ Files, on Facebook at Crashing the Mode, on our website, crashingthemode.com, on the yjfiles.tumblr.com, and at our email address, whelmedpodcast@gmail.com. And with all that out of the way, let's hand it back to Emily for...
Hello, Megan!
So the issue numbers for this episode are 5 and 6, and the titles are What's the Story and Fear. The issue release date was June 22nd and then July 20th of 2011, and the timestamps in universe are July 20th. The episode tie-in for this one is that it takes place 2 days before Drop Zone.
The writers for these 2 issues were Franco Aureliani, again, and Art Baltazar. The penciler was Christopher Jones, friend of the show. The inker was Dan Davis. Colors were Zach Atkinson. And the letter was Carlos M. Mangual. I'm going to say Mangual. Whether it's right or not, that's what I'm saying.
He can feel free to correct us online if he feels the need to.
He can.
Or anyone can.
Or in person.
If anyone knows, please tell us.
Just in time for your next mission.
So the establishing shot for this issue is that we open with Wally flipping through 600 channels of television trying to find something to watch and failing. He then sees McGann reading a book and tries to ask her out to the movies, but neither of them has any money, and surfing, but it's nighttime, and finally they settle on sitting around a campfire under the stars. But unfortunately for Wally, and fortunately for the rest of us, McGann didn't understand what he was trying to do and invites the entire team to join them.
Oh, Wally. The fire under the stars quickly becomes a camping trip with the entire team. Wally continues to throw heavy hints at McGann, but Robin calls him out a couple of times in these 2 episodes.
Bless.
Quote, dude kind of bordering on creepy, unquote. Which is more than I think he said in the actual show, which is interesting. Dick then suggests that they tell some stories, which triggers McGann to ask Calder actually how he became Aqualad. We learn that Calder completed 2 years of mandatory military service between 12 and 14 years of age. Then he was transferred to the Conservatory of Magic. We get to see the battle between Ocean Master and Aquaman that was alluded to in the series, and where Aquaman nearly dies, but is saved by Calder and his friend Garth. We learn that Aquaman had seen Batman and Green Arrow with sidekicks and had been contemplating one for himself, and he offers the position to Calder and Garth. Of course, Garth returns to the Conservatory of Magic, and Calder takes him up on the offer.
Then we get to see Wally's backstory. We learned that Jay Garrick's speed powers were apparently gained through an accident involving chemicals and electricity in the 1940s, because that's just how superpowers work. Jay then had a public identity at the time, so his biggest fan, Barry Allen, spent some time with him, learning about what made him the Flash. Barry then recreated the accident, making him the second and faster Flash. And then comes Wally, who discovers that his uncle is his biggest hero when he finds Barry's journals. Wally also attempts to recreate the accident, blows up part of his house, spends some time in a hospital, and then eventually, days later, his speed powers kick in. McGann then asks Robin to share his origin, but Wally points out that Batman won't even let him share his real name. Then the group turns their attention to Superboy. McGann asks what he remembers of being in the Cadmus pod, and Superboy says that the thing he remembers most, the one thing that's always on his mind, is destroying Superman.
With that bomb drop, we move on to issue number 6, Fears. We get Robin's full backstory because Dick is remembering it, triggered by McGann's question. So the readers actually get the history, but the friends around the fire don't. We learn that in this version of Robin's origin for Young Justice, the Flying Graysons included John and Mary Grayson, Dick's parents, Richard or Rick Grayson and his wife Carla, who are Dick's aunt and uncle, after whom Robin was named, and Dick's cousin John, who is named after his own father. Per Greg Weisman on Ask Greg, the two brothers were very, very close, so they named their sons after each other, which was very cute.
Oh.
The entire family, with one exception, died during a netless routine when Tony Zuko, a mob enforcer, sabotaged the trapeze they were using because Jack Haley had refused to pay protection money. That one family exception was Dick's uncle Rick, who actually lived, apparently, though the accident paralyzed him, leaving him unable to take care of Dick. Dick was adopted by Bruce, who was at the circus that night and saw the incident, or at least that's the implication.
Yeah,
and that's the
real answer.
Yeah, we don't get a real answer to that. Like in the original story, Bruce was there when the accident happened. In Nightwing Year One, and actually in Tim's retelling of his origin as well in the comics, Bruce was there and changed into Batman during the whole incident, actually. But in the comic here, it's just Dick, everything was a blur, and then he looked up and Bruce Wayne was there, so I don't know. Bruce ends up, of course, training Dick to become Robin, and together they bring Zuko to justice, giving Dick the closure that Bruce, at least as far as we know, never got. I think I mentioned on a recent episode, actually, that for many, many decades, Bruce didn't know who killed his parents. And it wasn't until the 80s where they introduced the character of Joe Chill, and Bruce got some closure on that front. So I'm not sure what they did with this one. I don't know if Joe Chill's a thing in the Young Justice universe at the moment.
So Wally then interrupts Robin's train of thought, focusing back on what Superboy had said at the end of the previous issue. The group asks him what he meant by destroying Superman, and Superboy admits that the thought appears in his head sometimes, and he wonders if that's why he was originally created. The team assures him that he is a hero and that his actions speak for his integrity. But Superboy isn't entirely convinced. But he thanks them for the support anyway. Then we turn to McGann, who shares an interesting story. We learn that Martians all live underground and that McGann has 29 siblings and over 300 cousins. And we learn about both white and red Martians and the dynamic that the whites aren't treated well. She tells a story about John wanting to introduce a younger Martian hero to Earth, so he holds a competition. McGann enters along with half the planet, according to her, and she wins, earning her a place beside him on Earth. And we'll talk about that a little later, about all that.
Yeah, we have some insights on this one.
Yeah, this is an interesting
one. For two of our favorite characters. So with that final origin told, the team heads to their tents, but Calder offers to stay behind and keep Superboy company, but Superboy says he wants to spend some time alone around the fire. We then get to see the details of his quote-unquote destroy Superman thoughts. And it isn't a thought or memory of destroying the heroic Superman that we know. So we see several panels of Superman destroying buildings and hurting, potentially murdering Lois Lane and Perry White in the Daily Planet. We also see a quick shot of Jimmy Olsen as well, which is the only time I can think of. They may show up again in a later comic. I don't remember necessarily, but I think it's the only time we see Lois and Jimmy in Young Justice.
I think you're right, yeah.
Superboy arrives, flying, I should note, in his solar suit, kills Superman, and saves the world. We also get another memory following that one where Superboy has cracked his pod from the inside, apparently reacting physically to the dream that the genomes have implanted. Superboy then states back in the current timeline that he knows for sure that this was why he was created, to kill Superman should he go evil. And that's the end of our lighthearted tale of stories around the fire. Let's move on to some Aster.
Yeah, let's do that.
Superboy, are you alright?
I'm fine. Feeling the Aster.
Poor puppy dog Connor and his pain.
Oh, man.
So there are a bunch of little things that I like in this issue, and we'll get to the main thing that I want to talk about in a bit, but I do want to talk about some little things. Reading it through this time, the fact that Wally's plan to go to the movies is just so unceremoniously thwarted by the fact that they're just two broke teenagers made me laugh way too hard this read through. Like that was just too real, and it was quite funny to me that they acknowledged that, like, wait, we don't have any money. You're an alien and I'm just Wally and we have no money. But aside from that, it's a little thing, but I liked that they bothered to draw McGann and Calder both sitting farther away from the fire. Because that's like a little detail that nobody would probably bother to ask too many questions about.
Wally even mentions like sitting around a fire, sitting around a fire looking at the stars, and McGann's like,
goes,
fire?
Dude, no. dude, but like, I'd die. He's like, oh, right, sorry, whoops. And they bring extra chairs and have them sit farther back, and it's cute, and I like it. And seeing them sit next to each other and bond over that little thing is always cute. I like when they get to group them together for that. I also liked with Calder's backstory that kind of seeing that he was a lot more reckless when he was younger, which was kind of cool, because we see Calder as this very stoic, impassive 17-year-old oldest member of the team, oh so very sure of himself. And part of his backstory is, me and my friend rushed into a battle we knew we couldn't win just because we thought we could maybe help, kind of. And we got beaten up by Ocean Master, but we tried. And that is so different from the Calder that we see in the show and in most of the rest of the comics. But I loved that little thing of being like, oh, you were younger, you were less experienced, you did not have this training with Aquaman yet.
Impulsive and heroic, both.
Yeah.
Right?
It's so good. Yeah. It's very good.
Yeah.
Also, in Kid Flash's backstory, he at one point refers to the Flash as Speedy McSpeed. And it's such a dumb joke. And I laughed really hard because that's something any teenage boy would say. That's something I would probably say. Just what's
this next thing. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say this next thing you bring up, I didn't think about.
Did Kid Flash just kind of reveal Barry's secret identity to a bunch of people without like the express permission of his mentor? Because I think that just happened.
Says, my uncle is the Flash, basically.
Yeah,
is basically what he says, which is completely outs Barry.
And he's somewhere. He's like,
interesting.
Hi, I'm Wally. I'm Wally West. Y'all know who I am. I'm fine with sharing my secret identity with my friends. I'm like, that's fine. It makes me
wonder, like, I know Bruce is like super like locked down on Robin with his origin, but maybe Barry's not as much like with the team.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe. It just raised some questions for me this time through. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Seems reasonable.
But also, speaking of Kid Flash, seeing his backstory, and the thing that's interesting with Wally's backstory is that he's an unreliable narrator throughout the whole thing. What his speech bubbles say of what he's saying to the team and what we get the glimpses of what actually happened don't always perfectly line up. Like, he was saying that the Flash was way more excited to have a sidekick than he actually was and stuff, because Wally's trying to cast himself in a good light. But with that, we see that Wally literally blew up his garage and almost got himself killed because he wanted to be a superhero that much. And he wanted to work with his uncle that much. And this issue really does showcase through a lot of what Kid Flash says that Wally may be stupidly cocky all the time, but these little flashbacks make it really clear that deep down, he's actually really insecure about this whole thing and about his place as a superhero. He just wants to have fun and help people and work with his uncle. And it's just really sweet getting to see that and getting to see the origins of that through this comic. So I liked that.
Yeah, Flash, I want to talk about his background a little bit in a minute, because the Jay Garrick Flash Wally thing is different than the comics, actually.
Cool.
It's kind of parallel, sort of, but it's different for Barry, that's for sure. So it's interesting.
You want to go into that now, or you want to wait?
You know what? I might as well. Like, I guess because like Jay Garrick's origin was a little weird. So he, like, the original origin was he. I'm sorry, but this is the 30s and 40s. He was a college student and he was working in a laboratory, and he went out for a smoke break, but he had inhaled hard water vapors and then had a smoke, and then he had superpowers. And like, at least later on they change it to heavy water, so at least there's some kind of, I guess, radioactivity like nod. I don't know, but hard water it's just a thing. Like, I don't know what that's, I don't know. Anyway, and then eventually they kind of even modified that and said, look, whatever happened in that laboratory, it just triggered a latent metagene in him, and he had superpowers. So none of his original backstory had anything to do with the Speed Force like it did later on in a way. But then, of course, and I talked about this, so the Flash and Green Lantern and some of these original characters from those early days of what would become DC Comics, they got reinvented in the late 50s and early 60s. So when Barry Allen was created, it was actually just a complete revamp, and Jay Garrick was wiped out of history. He never happened. And so Barry was this, police forensic scientist who was in his lab, and lightning bolt came through his window and destroyed chemicals that poured all over him, and he had these super speed powers. So that's what happened. But in the comic, they're talking about how Jay Garrick had a laboratory accident, and then he had a public identity. Like, he doesn't wear a mask, so everybody knew who he was. And Barry Allen was a huge fan of Jay Garrick, and they became friends. And Jay told him about the experiment that made him the Flash. And then Barry recreated the accident in an attempt to become the Flash, which actually ended up working. And then Wally found Barry's notes, discovered he was the Flash, also tried to reproduce the accident. So that's really interesting to me, because in at least the original Kid Flash origin from the comics, when Wally finds out that Barry is the Flash, he asks him, like, how did it happen? And again, crazy origins from the 60s. Barry, like, used his super speed to rebuild, like, the exact chemicals and where they were and stuff on a shelf, and said, oh, everything looked like this. And then a lightning bolt showed up. And then, of course, a lightning bolt comes through the window and does the same thing and douses Wally, and he becomes Kid Flash. Later on in the comics, they actually talk about how the Speed Force is sentient in some way, and that the Speed Force is actually, that Speed Force that actually hit Barry and hit Wally were actually Barry and Wally at times in the future when they had been lost in the Speed Force. And then I don't know what they did with the New 52 and other things. So craziness. So I find it interesting because this is a really weird implication for Barry. Like, Barry was as reckless as Wally, like, recreating this accident that had, like, the whole odds of that even working are zero. And he did it anyway.
Comics.
Yeah, all I keep picturing is the animated movie and the comic, but the animated movie Flashpoint Paradox, where time gets changed. Barry never got his powers, and he goes to Batman, who is alive in this current timeline that he's in, and says, I need to reproduce the accident. So basically, douse me with chemicals and set me on fire. And, like, the first time it doesn't work. And so he's literally third-degree burns all across his body. And then he tells Batman, we got to do it again. And, that time it works. Sorry, spoilers. That time it works, and his healing factor kicks in. But don't do that. Like, medically speaking, it's terrible. Anyway, I find it interesting because I never picture Barry being impulsive like that. Like, Barry is, to me, like, always been a very, like, logical thinking scientist. Like, he's got a quirky personality, but not like Wally. Like, Wally's reproduction of the accident is interesting to me because it speaks to his intellect, but it also speaks to his recklessness. And I just don't necessarily see that as a quality of Barry, but we're clearly seeing it here. Like, that's terrible. Like, you're such a fanboy of a superhero that you try to reproduce the extremely dangerous accident that, interesting.
Barry pulls a very do as I say, not as I do situation on Wally.
He does. And, like, in his defense, like, I do feel a little bad for Barry, kind of, because it takes a few days for Wally's powers to kick in. So basically, the roof of his house explodes, and he's probably covered in burns, and he's in the hospital. So, like, before his powers kick in. And they're not as good, which is also interesting because Flash reproduces the accident that created Jay Garrick, but Flash has more powers and is stronger and faster than Jay was.
They kind of explain it though, because Flash's whole thing was Barry created it under like the perfect circumstances, whereas Wally took what kind of looks like a kid's chemistry set and threw something together in his garage and hoped it would work.
I always figured too, like this metagene thing. I mean, it's clearly genetically driven in Young Justice because all of these powers are, what happens when like human beings in Earth 16 have developed this thing, this genetic trigger that under stress of certain environmental factors, you will develop a power or something to allow you to survive that stress, which plays so beautifully into the idea of superhero origins in comics anyway. Bruce Banner getting irradiated by gamma radiation and basically his body triggering a self-defense mechanism makes much more sense than not, which they don't explain in the Marvel universe, but at least
universe alone. They're
right.
Trying.
No, hey man, I'm not going to bag on Marvel. Marvel's got great stuff. So, but like it makes a lot of sense. So I can see, so Wally's slower genetically, but he's also slower because the horrible thing he did to himself wasn't quite as fine-tuned as the horrible thing Barry did to himself.
I guess.
It's interesting. So. It's interesting.
But moving on, I also really like that they have Wally be a really good friend in this issue because his friendship with Robin is great, but they have him deflect on Robin's behalf when McGann asks about Robin's backstory. Because Wally knows, and Wally knows not only that he can't say, but that talking about it might be really hard for him. So Wally just kind of veers left and changes the conversation for Robin, so Robin doesn't have to. And I liked that little moment.
That's interesting, because I read that differently than you.
Yeah,
I'm trying to find it. I actually have the book in front of me.
The beginning of it, he is making a joke. I agree that he's making a joke about Batman, but there's that panel and the next panel, Robin looks really grim and Wally kind of has like this nervous look on his face and goes, "What about you, Superboy?" Or whoever they deflect onto.
Oh, that's so interesting because I think you're right. Because that look on Wally's face, I was reading originally as, because he's saying ha ha ha. I mean, but you're right. You could interpret that as kind of an awkward face where he's realizing, oh no, yeah, let's change this subject. I get
That's
it.
how I interpreted it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Hey everyone, buy and read the comics so you can see the ambiguous Wally face that we're talking about here.
Right.
But on the other side of that relationship, I also really appreciate that Robin calls Wally out on his creepy behavior throughout both of these issues, because bless you, Dick Grayson, for calling Wally out, because Wally needs to be called out, because you pointed out that is more than Robin ever does on the show explicitly, but this issue is also more than Wally ever does on the show. Like, despite the comics kind of trying to be more family friendly in general than the TV show, in general, Wally in this issue is towing a very thin line.
It's pretty bad. Yeah.
You don't get to share a tent with Miss Martian. Don't even suggest that, please.
I'm coming to your tent.
Wally, no, thank you, Robin, for grabbing him by the shirt collar and dragging him in the other direction. I appreciate that.
My headcanon is Robin talking to him about it in the tent too. Like, dude, that was totally
Dude.
not okay. But here's something that I read recently too, which was an interview with Greg Weisman from Comic-Con, where they had asked, a pretty standard question, like, what do you want people to take away from having watched these original seasons of the show? And his answer was, I hope that people feel like the characters are real. And he qualified it and said, not necessarily good, but real. Like, I think that one sentence has helped me be a little more okay with Wally. Like, if you look at it from a writing standpoint and from these are teenagers watching a show standpoint, and that this character is representing something that other maybe preteens and teens might want to emulate as proper behavior around, coworkers or whatever. Yeah, there's definitely a conversation to be had there. But Wally's behavior is also pretty real. Unfortunately, that's something that people do, that men and women in some cases do. I don't know. It made me think about it a little bit differently.
From a storytelling standpoint, my objections to Wally's behavior are not from a point of this is bad storytelling, but are a point of this is bad behavior.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I
feel like there is
a difference, yeah.
Big difference that sometimes people forget when talking about media.
Because what it's done is it started a conversation.
Yes. Definitely.
So something to be had. And when I'm watching shows with my kids, I'm doing that. Sometimes the shows that we watch have kids not acting in very good ways, and so we have conversations about it. So something to be looked at. I think you need to talk about this McGann backstory thing.
Oh, do I?
Like,
do
yes,
I need to
do.
talk
And
about my favorite character?
I have some opinions on this thing as well, because when I read it originally, it was before Image came out.
Yeah.
Where we find out everything. And so it was just like, oh, this is cute. It's a cute backstory.
Yep.
But now you read it with perspective on everything else, and it is a completely different kind of story.
And it's so good because it's done with so much intention, and I love it. So, talking about McGann's made-up backstory.
Yeah.
Because if you hadn't guessed yet,
I'm gonna
it's
jump
all
in
fake.
too.
It is all fake.
Well, is it all fake? That's my question.
A good portion of this is fake. Enough of it is true to make us not question things. The only things that are true are other things that she has mentioned on the show. Talking about her siblings, mentioned on the show. Talking about how white Martians are treated, mentioned on the show. Everything else is pretty fake. But let me go into it, because I'm very excited about this one. Because this is the first time we've gotten to see McGann do something in the comics. She creates this entire intricate lie to keep her secret, and that is fascinating in and of itself, that she has worked this out. This is not an on-the-fly story. This is something she has figured out. As if anyone asks, this is my thing.
Yeah.
But there are some great little hints about her white Martian identity in this, because even if you are have a lie this good, some things are gonna bleed through. She has something near the beginning of it where she says, most Martians are green like myself and my uncle Jean, but there are others with differences. And there is a pause, and pauses in comics are important. And that's just a good one of just a little writing thing of, she's not like, but there are others who look different. Moving on. She's like, there are others with differences. And that goes beyond physical to me, in my mind, of the way that's presented. She's not like, there are physical differences, there are differences. And that's, I think, in the way that white Martians are perceived. Because I know in a lot of other DC canon, white Martians are described as being more aggressive and more warlike inherently. So I think by just saying with differences, she's not just saying they have white skin, they look different. She's saying people think that they are inherently different.
Hold on.
It's all good.
Oh my God. Yeah. So, sorry, real quick. That just rocked me a little bit. this connection. So we don't know how the other white Martians are on the show. We only know Miss Martian,
Yes.
right? And I don't even think in the comics we see any other white Martians, do we?
Nope.
Okay. So in the Justice League animated series, the very first two-parter that opens things up, we find that John Jones is an alien and he's on Earth, and the whole thing is that there are white Martians. I think we had an expedition to Mars, and some aliens came, or our astronauts came back, but one of the astronauts was replaced by a shape-shifting white Martian. And there's white Martians, and they're horrible, and they're warlike, and there's all of these things. When you said stuff about, and there's supposed to be like a civil war where there's a bunch of genocide in the comics where John is one of the only Martians left on his planet. It never occurred to me that these white Martians may also still have this warlike tendency, or maybe a historical warlike tendency, which may feed directly into McGann's behavior in the second season.
Or even just a perceived expectation of a warlike tendency that's placed upon them, that like
maybe
they're not like that anymore. They haven't been like that for a very long time, but because there is this history of racial prejudice and everything that is placed upon them as what people assume they are.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Because again, she's telling this story from her perspective, and so the images that we're seeing are clearly not reality, because the actual images we're seeing are not what Martians look like.
No.
It's what the other people hearing the story are imagining in their head. Like, you can see there's this one panel where there's all of these male and female Martians, and all of the women are all redheads with freckles. Like, you feel like maybe this is what Wally's picturing in his head, because right then after that, he gets creepy again, talking about, are they all hot like you or whatever?
Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, I totally interrupted you. Keep going.
It's okay. More little things. There is one little word bubble that really stood out to me reading through this time, especially because we've talked about this more recently. She has a line where she says, "Both my parents are green." And when you say that out loud, that's one thing. But it is written as, "My parents are both green," with emphasis and italics and bold. And that is her insisting, my parents are green, both of them. I'm totally a green Martian. I am a full-blooded green Martian, totally.
Right.
Yep.
Where if she was,
not.
she wouldn't have any reason to say that.
Yeah. People don't talk like that, but she does.
Right.
But we know through things Greg Weisman has said on the internet that her dad is white, and that she is from a mixed race family on Mars of a white Martian father and a green Martian mother, and that she is one of only 2 white Martian children in her family of like 29 kids, something like that. Her and one brother is apparently a white Martian, according to Greg Weisman. So that emphasis of my parents are both green,
right?
It's like, that's a hint. People don't talk like that.
There's a follow-up line right after that too, where she says, my family, I had no issue with white Martians.
Yes.
So it's my family, ellipses, I, bold-faced, ellipses, had no issue with white Martians. One in 2 word bubbles right next to each other hints that she is not.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But
wow.
So great. And a little later on in that, she has a line where she says, others were not as tolerant, and the treatment of the white Martians was especially horrible. And that's all she says. And she glosses over it and doesn't really say what anything was. The image that they show is somebody getting like pushed, carrying a bag of groceries, because we're interpreting this in human ways. But like, this raises questions for me, but also shows that McGann is not just, I was a white Martian and faced rejection. It's like, Miss Martian went through some stuff on Mars because of her race, and that is horrible and painful, and just, my feelings over this are just, I feel so hard for this child. I want her to be okay, and feel so bad for her, even though she is lying through this entire scene. The one thing, though, that raised some questions for me reading it this time was her comment about growing up in a liberal, she says in quotation marks, environment raises some questions. Because I've always assumed through all of the series and various things that Greg Weisman has said, that things were weird with her family because of her white Martian-ness. But this statement, depending on whether or not it's a lie or not, raises some questions for me. Because I'm wondering, maybe I've been interpreting this wrong, or maybe she's just lying. And I can't tell, because it could be true.
To clarify, your issue is the idea that you had previously, which was my thought too, previously thought that because she was white, her family was having issues. Some members of her family were having issues. It was feeding into why she wanted to run away from Mars. And with this interpretation, she's saying, no, my family was fine with it, which leads you to, why did she want, she feels like she ran away from Mars. There's something that makes us feel that way. But in this story, she's saying like, oh, I'm a hero to my people and won this contest and like became this heroic thing. And I don't believe any of that.
Because that's what she wishes was her backstory.
That's
but even
what I'm
the
thinking.
Little things we get on the show are things like Red Arrow in season 1 says something about how, yeah, we know McGann is John's niece, but he has hundreds of nieces and nephews, and he only met McGann a few months ago when she stowed away on his ship. And so we know
she
that
says
is a
they
true
knew each
statement.
other really well.
Yeah. And yeah, just it's crazy the amount of intricate lies going into this. But that is one of those things where that is a vague enough statement. I grew up in a liberal environment, and she is from a family that is mixed race in this universe. Her father is a white Martian. She is not, everybody in my family is green and somehow I'm white. Her father is a white Martian as well. So you'd think there is a possibility that maybe her parents were okay with it and her siblings weren't. Maybe this is true, but everything else she faced in her life was enough to make her run away from home. We don't really know. And I want to know. So, like, season 3.
So her quote here is, of all the brothers, sisters, parents, aunts, and uncles, the family member I was closest to was Uncle Jean. We had a great relationship. But Roy's statement was they only met 6 months ago?
Not even 6 months ago. He says a few months ago, whatever it is, something like that.
I'll have to go look up that quote because,
it's in Secrets.
Total lie.
It's in Secrets when they're talking about who might be the mole.
Yeah.
During that little conversation.
Oh my gosh. Like, the other thing that's just so disturbing to me and frustrating is that, not frustrating, but like, she's lying so well. Like, with the exception of the few little trip-up corrections that we're talking about here, like, this is a super intricate lie that gets countered by data in the show. And because we know, like, if it was just, once again, if this was just a random comic tie-in that was just extra side stories that didn't have anything to do with anything and wasn't considered canon, then whatever, no big deal. But this is Young Justice, and their bar is much higher. And they do these things with intention. And you can clearly see the things they are doing with intention, like her stumbling over some of this dialogue, which makes you think, like, no, they knew that John only knew her for 6 months. So she is clearly lying. That the implication of her statement is they knew each other her whole life and got along the whole time. She doesn't specifically say that, but the implication is there.
Yep.
And this contest thing, oh man, this contest thing that she says that she won drives me insane because I just so desperately want to know. Because in the comics, she stows away on John's ship when he comes back to Earth, and he finds her on her ship.
Also
he
on Young
finds
Justice.
her on his. Wait, is that what happened too? Like she stows.
Yeah, in that same quote from Red Arrow in Secrets, he says Jean only met her however many months ago when she stowed away on his ship.
Oh, I don't remember that.
I'm here to remember Miss Martian quotes.
No, that's great.
That's my job.
I see, and this was my question. I was like, there's a bunch of stuff in here that's clearly a lie or a misrepresentation, but I guess this contest thing could have happened. It just seems so dramatic and over the top and huge that I don't believe it happened, but I don't have any proof. Now, oh my gosh, the whole thing. Jeez. Oh my goodness.
But
Anyway.
yeah. So that is a whole thing. But aside from that whole thing, as one little minor fun fact at the end of this deep analysis of Miss Martian and her intricate lying backstory, as a fun little side note, there is an image in her backstory of a Martian family dinner, and it is clearly modeled after a famous Norman Rockwell painting called Freedom from Want, or occasionally people call it either the Thanksgiving picture or I'll Be Home for Christmas. It has 10 million names, as paintings do sometimes. And to me, that's just kind of adorable because it is taking something that is such a part of nostalgic Earth culture and projecting it onto how she kind of wishes a happy, normal family could be for her. And that just really, really hit me in the heart. And I thought it was a cute little detail that they put there, especially because the overarching theme of that one painting is part of a series of 4 paintings. I know this because I've gone to the Norman Rockwell Museum more than once.
I want to hear this. I love Norman Rockwell, but I'm not a scholar by any means.
Neither am I. I've just been to a museum more than once. But that painting is part of a series of 4 paintings that are called the 4 Freedoms. And if I'm remembering correctly, they are freedom from want, this one that I'm talking about, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and freedom from fear are the 4. And they are all about the American experience and the core freedoms of America. And they are beautiful paintings, like almost everything Norman Rockwell put together. And both of the freedom from paintings, the freedom of 2 are kind of more general, but both freedom from want and freedom from fear are very family centric. And they're fascinating and cool, and you can go read the Wikipedia page about them if you want to.
Paintings analyzing a painting.
Yes, it's crazy. But there is a whole thing behind that and everything, and I just thought that was such a cool little touch in the decision of how to draw this representation of what a happy Martian family would look like. It is the quintessential American image dating back to Norman Rockwell in this.
So here's the thing. God, there's so much going on now with McGann in my head. Like, let's remove any of her any of her scenes of her relationship with Jean in the show. Ignoring all that and only taking into account the things we were just talking about these blatant lies and the imagery in those lies.
Yes.
Let's also assume something else. So my thought process was, look, all of these Martians are being represented as at least as human-like as Jean's hybrid Martian human form he uses when he's in his superhero form, not the monstrous Martian form. So they're all at least that human to as human as McGann looks, which is very human and just green skin.
Yes.
My original thought process was we are seeing these images because she's telling a story to the team, and these are what the team are picturing in their head because they only have that frame of reference, right? Females look like Miss Martian, males look like Jean.
Yep.
Now I'm not so convinced because the through line seems to be because Wally is telling a story and his images are very different, right? So he's clearly an unreliable narrator. And in McGann's, if they've sent that trope or that trend, then that means we're actually looking at what's going on in McGann's head, which means that McGann is maybe not lying to herself, but she's remembering how she wants to remember things.
Yeah.
Which means that that picture of family life for her is a lot like that never happened, implying that her family life was not a Norman Rockwell painting, that it potentially was horrible based on the things that she's talking about here. Like, I'm not sure I even believe the whole liberal thing, even though her dad's a white Martian and there's 29 siblings. Like, it seems to me like there's something horrible that happened to her that she just wants to be someone else so badly. And then it kind of gets balanced out a little bit because of her relationship with Jean in the show is actually quite loving, and he's very accepting of who she is. But it kind of is weird because his acceptance of her and love for her, I wonder if he knows that she's escaped from something not good.
I'd believe it.
I don't know.
And while I can completely believe that her family life wasn't liberal and accepting necessarily, I can believe Jean's was. I can believe that there are other people who had them and that she wished she was part of that. I don't think that every person McGann ever encountered in her life was horrible to her.
Right.
But I can definitely see that she kind of would wish that she had that kind of life. And there's also, through this story and through just general talk of Miss Martian on the show, the idea that Martians can't really lie to each other because they are so telepathically linked, that I can believe that in her family, possibly, maybe her parents were fine with her being white and her siblings weren't. Maybe whatever it was, maybe everybody tried to pretend they were okay with it, but you can't pretend, and that hurts even more. I can believe so many things about McGann's family. I just want to know more about this because this is fascinating to me.
Especially because it's so genetically interesting that out of 30 kids, only 2 of them, like 1 in 15, turned out to be white, which, you know, can kind of lead you to, I don't know, at least understandable is not quite the right word, but this idea that, okay, yeah, it's so rare when you have these mixed race couples to have a white child that I could definitely see her. She's standing out even in her own family. It's not like it's 50% of the kids were white, you know? In addition to that, in this whole memory, too, she brings up red Martians, which are not actually a thing that I remember. I'd have to look it up in the comics.
The show. They're just there.
Yeah. I don't know what the red Martian story is, actually. I'm going to actually look it up real quick.
Remember when we thought that, like, the comics commentary episodes were going to be, like, these short little episodes?
Well, this one in particular, I think there's going to be a couple in the future that dive a little deeper. The thing is, like, the red Martians, like, literally one of the panels that they're referencing in this wiki article is just Young Justice, a picture from this exact comic. There's also a thing about yellow Martians, one of the 3 known species of intelligent life found on Mars. So it's interesting because I think in the comics there are no red Martians. I think they're yellow, white, and green. And the yellow ones are like extinct or something. So once again, and I'm going to talk about something like this in Robin's background too, there's something that's being introduced here that's weird. I do see a DC Comics piece of art that is showing, GM. Oh no, that's Marvel. So yeah, this isn't even or is it? You know what? I just don't think there's red Martian history. So I'm interested to see what they're going to do with this in Young Justice. No, the red aliens that we see in DC Comics are actually from Saturn. So I don't know. Very strange. I'm interested, not strange, but intriguing, and I'm interested to see more about it. God, so many implications for this, for McGann, which seems to be, on the surface, like I said, like a really straightforward story of her history.
Yeah. Right?
Did you read the comics? Did you read the comic tie-ins before you got to Image, out of curiosity?
Yes. I'm trying to remember because the hiatuses make everything so crazy.
Yeah,
and I'm trying to remember. These were part of ones that I read when they were released as a graphic novel, when they were released as the compilation. Okay. The first part of the series, those first 6, I read as a compilation. My mind is trying to piece things together of, like, I read those around my birthday because I got them as a birthday gift, I feel like, or something like that.
Because I just remember my emotional memory of reading the comics was that I was reading these before Image came out, and so it just didn't strike me as weird.
Yes, I agree.
In any way. So I accepted that as part of her origin. I don't remember it very much. Like, I couldn't remember, like, do they live underground and why do they live underground and like that kind of thing. But they clearly state that they live underground in the comic here. So I don't remember all of it.
And it's one of those things where my approach to it is so weird because I feel like I did read this before I saw Image, but I can't remember if I read this before I read Miss Martian's Wikipedia page.
Oh,
and so that's the thing.
Which I never
Because I have that thing of, I accidentally spoiled Image for myself before Image happened.
Before Image happened. Yeah, interesting. Well, there's a couple of other, like, well, at least there's the only other thing, there's like one minor thing that I thought was kind of cute. There's a lot of nods in this one, but one of them is a Miss Martian nod, which is the book that she's reading at the beginning when Wally tries to ask her out on a date, is Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, which I thought was really funny, which is all about a culture living on Mars and, you know, how they're dead now, but their technology was left behind and all this kind of stuff. So interesting. And folding into, we're also talking about Wally and Flash as well. There's a scene where Barry, being a fan, they represent that by Barry having Jay sign a picture for him. And the picture is actually the cover of the first Jay Garrick Flash comic, where he's running in this really weird, he's in this weird, like, very static position, and his hand is sticking out, and he's like blocking a bullet that was like meant for this woman. But it's kind of cool when they take things like that and they fold it into the background. But the thing with me is, like, you got a huge thing about Miss Martian and this kind of odd thing with Wally, but like they do the same thing with Robin.
So good.
Like, this is different than the comics, guys. Like, in the animated series, Batman in the animated series, they only show his parents dying. And they have had in the comics, like, this uncle show up. I remember there's some story with, like, his uncle, what I think his name was, like, Jerry or George or something like that. And he was older, and he shows up, and they have a custody battle over Dick. And, of course, the lawyer shows the jury that Bruce Wayne is this womanizer, right? Socialite womanizer, because that's what he wants people to think, because he doesn't want them to think he's Batman, but that backfires. And so they end up, the court gives, you know, guardianship of Dick to this George guy with his new wife and blah, blah, blah. Ends up it's a big blackmail thing for Bruce Wayne. They wanted to get, you know, money off of him and that kind of thing. But that's pretty much it. And so here you've got Robin's uncle. I don't know, like, Dick has a surviving family member that he knows. Like, this changes so much. Is Bruce helping this family member out financially? Like, you'd think that he probably would be, right? Does Dick, like, go hang out and visit with his uncle from time to time? Does he get stories from his family's past? Like, if he and Dick's dad were really close, like the implication, then Dick's probably getting all of these stories about his dad as a child and all of this stuff that in the comics, he never gets any of that. He gets none of that. He doesn't know anything about his history, which comes up regularly in the comics as contentions. Like, there's a storyline where Raish hires an actor, or doesn't really hire an actor. I guess he convinces this guy whose son ran away to join a circus that Dick was his grandson, to destabilize the relationship between Dick and Bruce. Like, that comes up. There's this whole Parliament of Owls thing. Like, one of the in the New 52 reboot, we're introduced to this apparently long-lived villainous organization in Gotham called the Parliament of Owls. And you discover that Dick's great-grandfather is actually this villain who's been running around Gotham attacking Batman recently, who's an undead assassin for the Owls called Talon, who's actually Dick's great-grandfather. And we find out also, in fact, that Dick, being a member of Haley's Circus, was being groomed to become the next Talon. And that gets derailed when Bruce stops him and that kind of stuff. But, you know, I've never been a huge fan of that twist on Dick's past with the whole Parliament of Owls. But with the idea that his uncle is still alive in Young Justice, it opens the door to learning so much more about Dick's family history that we never got before. So it also, in a weird way too, like, it also might make this really interesting, at least to me, interesting empathic connection to Artemis. Because they both have a family member, like, living with a similar, like, parallel disability that Robin can at least relate to. They have a common frame of reference for this kind of thing in their family. So basically, I want to know more about this Uncle Rick character in a bad way. Because from a character development standpoint, it changes Robin completely.
Yeah.
You're just staring at me right now.
That was a lot.
I am
agree.
blown away by having him have a family member alive.
Meanwhile, I just want to hug Tiny Dick Grayson and tell him everything will be okay. Is always my reaction to this bit, but
I know. Yeah. But like Tim had, both of his parents were still alive, if I remember correctly, when he became Robin. It may just have been his dad, but then his dad ends up getting killed later on. So like it was weird because like Jason was an orphan living on the streets. So Tim was the first one to have anybody who had any kind of family member that was still alive at the time. So again, Dick having this uncle alive allows for some really interesting story, but also character development ideas. I just wonder if they planned something for that, because Greg specifically, this is a brand new character. Like I said, it's not even the same name as the uncle who showed up in the comics. So I feel like there's a whole bunch of stuff that Greg and Brandon must have put together on purpose about this character.
I'd believe it. I'd love to see it. And before we move on, I do just want to say that I feel so bad for Superboy at the end of this issue too.
Oh my God.
I just want to hug him and sit him down and have somebody help him work through his emotions, because that boy has a lot going on. And even the rest of the team tries to brush it off at first, because it is...
Yeah.
That's a real intense statement when you say, I think my entire purpose is to kill the greatest superhero on Earth. And everybody's like,
right.
No, don't.
Yeah. Well, even McGann says something like, oh, you should just not have those thoughts.
Yeah.
And like maybe coming from a trained like telepath, that's a thing you can do, but not so much otherwise. And I remember reading this pretty early. And even though in the very first episodes of Young Justice, Superboy says that his purpose is to either replace Superman if he dies or to kill him should he turn from the light, is the phrase that he uses.
Yep.
And in retrospect, I was looking at that, of course you read it as, or interpret it as, if he stops being good and he becomes a villain. But that's not what he says. He says if he turns from the light, which implies something completely differently, obviously, in the show. So here, he's literally having memories of stopping Superman if he becomes a villain.
Yep.
And does that mean the genome that like cared for him and missed him actually wanted that, like implanted those memories because they actually wanted that to be the reality instead of quote unquote, if Superman turns from the light, i.e. they can't control Superman and they need to destroy him? It's two different interpretations. I don't know. There's a lot underlying all of this character development with this just, hey, let's sit around and talk about our origin stories.
Let's eat some s'mores and have a little camping adventure.
Right.
And then have two people on the internet talk about it for over an hour, because that's how much is happening in this issue.
I know. I love it. All right. Well, let's now that we've wrapped all that up, we would love to hear from you guys online about your interpretation of some of these scenes and what's going on and how this might be shown in future comics. I'd say in future episodes of seasons, but the original team's getting older in the third season and then again older in the fourth season. So I'm interested to see how that goes.
No. Didn't you know Season 3 is absolutely an entire flashback season to the 5 years skip, and that's all I want. Give it to me.
That's not going to happen. It's all going to be all comics. Guy, they have to do more comics. Please help us all get more comics. Buy Comixology comics and buy them for your friends. If they don't want them, too bad. Buy them for them.
You can gift them on Comixology.
Yes, you can gift them.
You can do everything. It's great.
That's right. Unfortunately, we can't binge them like in Netflix. Just run them in the background. But
you could buy 10 million copies of them, though.
Right. You could. That's true. All right. Let's move on to some artistic license.
Have all four sidekicks ever been in the same place at the same time?
Don't call us sidekicks.
So in artistic license, we'll be recommending individual issues, miniseries, and graphic novel collections, both from DC and other companies, who have titles we think Young Justice fans will enjoy. Artistic license is designed to give you an on-ramp into the classic story arcs of the past, so you might catch a glimpse of what's to come in the future. And I have two. You can go online and just look up, best Nightwing or best Dick Grayson stories or that kind of thing. But there's two that I want to recommend personally. One is Nightwing number 25. He's had a couple of volumes of his series. So this one has a picture of Nightwing and Robin on the cover. They're in midair, running through the city. It's called The Boys. And Nightwing basically recreates a training exercise that he used to do with Batman when he was Robin. And he takes Tim Drake along with him. And so, part of it's the training exercise, but like 95% of this comic is Tim and Dick having this like older brother, younger brother kind of relationship, chat and dynamic. It's really cool. And the other one I want to recommend is Nightwing Year One. Nightwing Year One's a 6-part series in the tradition of all the other Year One style stories that dives deeper into the details of why Dick made the change from Robin to Nightwing. The change happened around the time that Judas Contract was released, and there was a period of time where Dick wasn't Robin, and he hadn't become Nightwing, and he basically was just hanging out with the team, not being a superhero, but in his like standard Dick Grayson, persona. This goes into some details about kind of what happened in the comics as far as the falling out relationship between Bruce and Dick and that kind of thing, and how he made that transition to Nightwing. So go check that out. And with all that out of the way, I think we can wrap up this mission and head out of the Watchtower. So the best way to support the show is to share with a friend, of course. You can also support us with a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. Leaving a rating or review pushes this up in the search ranks and helps other people find the show.
So please continue to hashtag buy YJ Comics on Comixology and buy the show somewhere online until the DC streaming service launches. You can also now use hashtag Young Justice Outsiders when talking about Season 3 online, and if you want to help us get more episodes, more Secret Origins, more actual play podcasts, and more of all of the other stuff that we do, please consider supporting us through Patreon. For just a few dollars a month, you can help us do even more with the show while getting some great rewards for yourself. And remember,
stay whelmed, everyone.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our hosts are Rich Howard and Emily Booza. Our editor and producer is Neal Powell. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.